I knew when I was a young child that I was a lesbian. Looking back, I can see that I knew that from a very young age, but I repressed my sexuality until I was 22 for various reasons. As a young child, I was in 2 abusive relationships with young girls that I was very close friends with. I had crushes on both of these girls. I didn't realize it at the time because I was so young, and you don't know how to vocalize or express those kinds of feelings when you're that young. But I let them bully me, I let them boss me around, I let them do whatever they wanted to because I wanted their friendship and I wanted their acceptance and I wanted their love. And I always felt from a very young age that I was different from other girls in particular. I was weird, I was picked on, I was a little more introspective and philosophical than most people my age were, and I really loved women. I loved being around them. I loved playing football with the guys. I loved palling with the guys, and that was true my whole life. I was very tomboyish, and I was also very dramatic. So more than anything, I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be like the girls that I thought were so beautiful and so much better than me. But more than anything, I really wanted them to like me, and I wanted to feel that they liked me, and I wanted to feel accepted and loved by them. So in those feelings of feeling so different and feeling so confused and so lost about how I felt, I allowed myself to be pushed around and bullied and abused and manipulated by women. And that pattern continued through pretty much my entire life. In middle school, as an adolescent, I would always find 1 or 2 girls to pal around with that I idolized and looked up to and wanted to be a part of their group and wanted to be their friend, and then also secretly wanted to be their girlfriend. And they were always talking about the guys that they had crushes on. And so because I didn't have those feelings, I really wanted to. More than anything, I wanted to be normal. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be straight. So I would fabricate crushes on guys, and I would allow myself to be pushed into early relationships with guys that I didn't really like and didn't feel comfortable having, but would do anyway because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what's normal. And that was what I wanted so desperately, to feel safe and to feel accepted. And it would always culminate in a huge fight, huge drama, me coming home after school, crying into my pillow, and my parents being very concerned. I developed major depression when I was 11 years old and repressed those feelings as well. That was sort of my default position because of the way that I repressed so much of my truth as a child. Whenever I had an authentic feeling, I would repress it and not share it and not talk about it because, particularly with depression or my sexuality, or these feelings that I had that I didn't see anybody else around me having, I felt like if I were to share that with somebody, I would put that on them. One, they would think that I was crazy or weird or a monster like I felt inside, or even worse, I would make them feel what I was feeling, and I felt horrible on the inside, and I more than anything did not want to make anybody else feel horrible. I genuinely believed that I deserved to be miserable. I was raised in a Christian family and went to a Christian middle school. My parents and my direct family were never overly religious or theological. They weren't anti-LGBTQ. They weren't, homophobic or bigoted in any way. They're very loving and open-minded people. The school that I went to, though, was very old dogma, old church. Even thinking is a sin, you'll go straight to hell. So because I knew that I liked women and I knew that it was wrong, and because I knew that I was depressed and so miserable, I genuinely believed that that was my punishment from heaven for being an inherently bad person. So I didn't talk about it. I didn't ask for help. I didn't seek out guidance. I didn't explain myself. I just was silent and let people push me in any direction that they felt necessary and allowed them to use me to their own ends. And when my Christian school closed after 7th grade, I went to public school, public middle school for 8th grade. And that was really difficult. Moving to a public education from such a small private education in 8th grade, all of the students that I was now classmates with had known each other for years. Many of them went to elementary school together, and I didn't know anybody. I showed up, I was very gothic. I was very depressed and withdrawn, very smart, and I had really short hair. I didn't talk very much. Everybody called me a dyke. They assumed that I came from juvie. They called me smart girl or weird girl or crazy girl. They assumed I was dangerous. There were lots of rumors about me that I was violent and that I got into fights, which never took place. And I got socialized. And through those experiences, it just continued to reinforce this idea that I had that I was inherently wrong, that I was inherently a monster, that I was inherently ugly. And it made it even more difficult for me to open up to anybody. And so the older I got and the more of these negative experiences that kept perpetuating upon me, the more I was convinced that talking about it was the worst thing that could possibly happen. So I didn't. And I entered high school. And at this point, I started turning to substances to assuage my deep depression and fear and hatred of myself. I started smoking marijuana when I was 11 years old. I got drunk for the first time when I was 12. It was technically an accident at first, but once I was at a party and I didn't know there was alcohol there, and someone handed me a cup and I drank it, and I knew instantly that it was alcohol, so I continued drinking it and got really drunk, and it ended up not being a very safe situation. Luckily, nothing overtly bad happened, and I ended up at a safe place to sleep at my best friend's house, and it was okay. But because it ended up turning out okay, it made it so that it was easier to continue to use those behaviors in the future. In high school, I smoked marijuana every day, all day. If I was awake, I was stoned. And I was able to do that and keep it a secret from my family because at this point I was so great at keeping secrets. I was a really good liar, and I had excellent grades. I was very smart. So long as I came home on time and I had straight A's and I gave them no reason to assume that anything was wrong, they didn't ask me very many questions. And I was really great at maintaining the status quo. And I was just an excellent liar. And it turned into a pathological sort of thing very quickly. I developed a friendship with a girl in my sophomore year of high school, and she was openly bi. And that really intrigued me because I really liked her and I had a crush on her, and I'd never met anybody who was openly bi. And so we were kind of bi together, and we had all of these friends at school. And it was complicated because I really liked her and I really liked being with her, but I could tell that she sort of used our bisexual relationship as a way to get attention from guys. So it sort of created this opinion or belief in my brain that female sexuality is for men. It's something that they can look at, it's something that women use to get attention from guys, and Kendall was always trying to set me up with guys. She was very manipulative and also somewhat abusive, and I loved her, and I really wanted to be what she wanted me to be. So she taught me a lot of things about how to smoke every day and how to party, and she was also involved in some really high-risk behavior with some people who I knew were involved in gangs. I never saw any actual violent crimes take place. I never saw any actual gang activity take place, but I was hanging out with these people and partying with these people and listening to the things that they said. So I was definitely making high-risk choices, involved with people who were making really high-risk choices, and it got out of control really quickly. This was when I started having issues with eating disorders. I had horrible body image just because of the self-hatred that I had inherent, just, built up in every aspect of myself, and was deeply anorexic, and once again, really addicted to marijuana, drinking every weekend, still maintaining a good grade point average and everything because school was really easy. And when this friendship with my friend ended, I ended up dating my first boyfriend, and I loved that he liked me. I loved that I was getting attention from guys because that was normal and that's what people wanted, and that's what girls were supposed to want. But being with him made me really uncomfortable, and I wasn't able to do anything sexual with him. And rumors started going around, and he was unsatisfied with it, and I knew that he didn't really like being with me, so I broke up with him. But then as soon as I broke up with him, I needed it to be his fault. So I sort of created this situation where I felt like he broke up with me because there was something wrong with me. And I would continue this behavior. I would find a guy friend that I liked and would develop this massive crush on them. And when they didn't want me back, would get really upset and pine and wait and wait and wait. And then when a guy did reciprocate any sort of romantic feelings for me, I would immediately not be interested and not want to go there and couldn't do anything sexual with them because it wasn't what I wanted. But once again, if you repress your sexuality and your truth and your sense of self long enough, eventually you have no idea who you are and what you really want. And this story continued to play out for me all through college, really. I was involved in a deeply emotionally abusive relationship with a guy in college, which completely changed my sense of self. It changed my relationship with spirituality and how I felt about my spirituality, and continued to perpetuate this belief that I was an inherently bad person because he believed that I was an inherently bad person. I had to change many aspects of myself in order to receive love from him. And I so desperately wanted to receive love from him because I so desperately wanted to prove to myself that a man could love me, because I knew that a woman would never love me, which is what I really wanted. And the universe works in mysterious ways. It, of course, blew up. Toxic relationships always tend to do so in pretty violent ways. And the therapist that I saw, I did not talk about sexuality with her because she didn't ask. I did not talk about PTSD with her because she didn't ask. I talked about depression and spirituality because she was a Christian counselor. She was a therapist, but she was based in a Christian counseling agency. So we talked a lot about spirituality and depression and about the nature of an abusive relationship, but because topics of sexuality were never brought up, because topics of PTSD were never brought up, because topics of substance abuse were never brought up, I didn't bring them up. I wasn't asked the questions, so I didn't say it. Part of me wishes that someone would have asked at some point if something bad had happened to me. I was raped as a 16-year-old, being in the partying mode, pretending to be something that I wasn't. I put myself in a lot of high-risk situations and dangerous things happened to me. And I had really bad PTSD after that happened. And because I had PTSD and because I had such bad depression and because I was repressing so much, I ended up exhibiting a lot of somewhat psychotic behaviors. I was having panic attacks that involved hallucinations. And I was very honest with my therapist at one point and expressed that. And she sort of immediately just shifted in the room. She was like, this is above my pay grade. I'm not able to help you with these problems. I'm going to transfer you to a psychiatrist. And he spoke with me for 10 minutes, diagnosed me with schizoaffective disorder, and put me on antipsychotics, which didn't really help. I don't believe that I ever actually had any sort of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. I believe I had deep PTSD and had repressed my true self for too long, and it was repercussing in somewhat hallucinatory or psychotic behavior. And what I really needed was PTSD counseling and someone to ask me about my sexuality and about my sexual experiences. And that didn't happen. And it's not necessarily the fault of any of the therapists or mental health counselors that I saw. If anything, it's just a culmination of many factors. My inability to speak, my inability to be honest, my inability to know myself, and their inability to have the knowledge or the know-how or the comfort level to ask those questions. I wish someone would have asked. I don't regret any of my experiences because today I am out. I came out when I was 22. I came out via a blog that I was writing online, so I came out pretty publicly. And my family was very accepting. Most of my friends were, I'm not really surprised to hear this. We sort of kind of always knew. which was great to hear on some levels, and on others it was a huge surprise for some people, and I've had to explain myself a great deal to some people, but I've been met with more acceptance than not. And it's taught me that the journey to self-love is really important, and it takes form really differently for everybody. But the sooner that you can know yourself and be brave enough to say who you are, the better off that your world will end up being. And loving yourself is the most important thing, and it's really hard, especially if you are someone who doesn't fit into the heteronormative, if you're just not normal, or the societal normal box, if you don't fit into those boxes that are predisposed to be in our current society, it's difficult to love yourself because you're taught that you're not worthy of love by a lot of people. But you are, because everybody is. And it took me 22 years to learn that, but now that I know it, I'm really passionate about it, and I love talking to people about it. When I was younger, I wish the adults in my life would have expressed more openly that gay people exist. My parents in particular never talked about it. It wasn't spoken about one way or the other. Many people's parents that I know are really against it, or if you come from a Christian background, most of the adults in your life will typically be very against it for religious reasons. It was just sort of not spoken about at all in my family. I didn't actually even know the term lesbian until I was 16. I'd never even heard it before. And when I went to Christian middle school, my teachers in particular, that was when I developed depression and started completely changing the way that I dressed. I cut off all my hair, I was wearing all black, I stopped talking completely. And my teacher at that time was very religious, a good man, but instilled some very limiting and dangerous beliefs in me. And when he saw this behavior, he took me to the side and gave me a CD full of Christian music and asked me to listen to it. And it was all about finding the true God and finding love, and it was a woman singing about a man. And it was just he made an assumption about the pain that I was in and prescribed the solution to it being that I needed spiritual guidance to a loving relationship with a man, which I wish he could have just asked what was wrong instead of assuming that I needed God. What I would say to anyone who wants to come out or is waiting to come out or needs to come out, that the time at which and the space in which you do that is entirely up to you. No matter what anybody says, it's not up to anybody else. It's not their choice. What they think doesn't matter. Your safety and your sense of self are the most important things in that discussion and in that decision. I waited until I was 22 because that was the moment in time at which I was ready to do so. It was the moment in time at which I was ready to say, I don't care who knows. I don't care what they think. I don't care if it changes their opinion of me. What matters more is that I'm ready to say this, I'm ready to be open about it, and I hope that I am met with love, but if I am not, it won't change the way that I feel about myself. If in any way a person who wants to come out worries that coming out will change their sense of self, or feels that someone's reaction will change their sense of self to the point that it would jeopardize their safety or their mental health, I would say that it is okay to wait. Nobody deserves your coming out story. That's up to you. The mental health field, or speaking with therapists, or my experience with the few therapists that I've been to, something that I think would be really helpful to know without asking or putting yourself in jeopardy if that therapist is a safe person to talk to, is if they would display an equality sticker, for example, in their office or on their door, or if they would have LGBTQ memorabilia or stickers or building a safe community, just anything displayed on the walls so that you can see in the physical environment that they are at least knowledgeable or aware enough to be a safe space. That would be really helpful. Beyond that, their demeanor, the sort of questions that they ask, if they're, for example, one of my first therapy sessions, I talked about my very difficult relationship with my friend. And looking back, what would have been extremely helpful is if someone would have asked, what kind of feelings do you have for her? Or how do you identify? No one ever asked me, how do you identify? They either assumed I was a dyke, and would use that word, or they just wouldn't ask at all. So to have just somebody ask, how do you identify, or what is your sexuality, it would have prompted the thought process in me and would have shown me that this is somebody who's curious and I could say whatever I wanted to them. That would be really helpful.